That's good enough.
All right, we are live. I'm going to give you back host.
Okay.
And then I'm going to stay for a bit for a check-in.
All right. Welcome, Patricia.
Welcome. How are you?
I'm very good.
To me too. You are.
And hi, Ken. How are you? Good to see you again. I've had Ken in other classes. I'm now starting to forget which classes I've had you in, Ken. You've been in so many, I think.
I need paper and pencil, don't I?
Yes, Russ, I've been in a couple of your other sessions and I'm still gathering information. I'm trying to put a book together over time. So I'm gathering information on it. I'm here again today.
Fabulous. Were you in the class, How to Self-Publish a Book?
Yes.
Okay. You know, I'm thinking of breaking that class up into two classes. One class being kind of like what self-publishing is and the kind of general things you have to know. And then one class where I would teach the steps that I went through. I mean, you still only got 45 minutes, but I would sit, you write the manuscript, then you get it edited, then you get feedback, and then you do layout and design, and then you build a platform. I could just go through the steps that I went through.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. Yeah.
Hi, Joanne. Welcome.
The sessions are interesting. So thank you.
Good.
Hello. How are you?
I'm well. There's also a session tomorrow evening called Publishing Mastermind at 7:00. And that's kind of an open session for anyone that has been in any classes or not. Even if you have any ideas about self-publishing, you can come to that class and share about your ideas and ask questions. And sometimes learners share what they're doing with each other and can after class exchange information and pass what they're writing back and forth. So it's a good session, 7:00 Eastern time tomorrow evening. That's a weekly group.
So that's 7:00 Eastern. That's about, we're in Arizona. That's about 4:00 here.
That's probably a good hour for you. That's an hour before happy hour, or maybe that is happy hour. Where in Arizona are you, Ken?
An area called Gold Canyon, just east of is Tempe and Mesa, and then Apache Junction, then Gold Canyon. The Superstition Mountains are right around. It's a nice spot.
Wow, I bet it is. I've been to Phoenix a few times. I've been to Scottsdale, and I have been down to Tucson numerous times.
Right.
And I have also been down to Nogales a couple times. In fact, I've been in Nogales, Mexico. It's my only time in Mexico. So I'm hoping to go back to Mexico this year. But yeah, why don't you all put in the chat where you're from? And then we all know where everyone's from. During today's session, you are invited to ask questions. This isn't that big of a group, so you can probably just ask questions as I'm talking today, but you can also put questions in the chat. We can circle back to those questions later on.
Pull these doors open. If this is too loud.
And we'll give it about one more minute to see if anybody else joins in. I think there were 8 people signed up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, we're about right for a group of 8. So yes, please put in the chat where you're from. We've got Joanne is from Birmingham. Ken is from, Ken is from Ontario, but you're in Arizona. Very good. I've been to Ontario a lot. I don't know how many times, at least a dozen. When I was a publisher, we had an office in Kitchener-Waterloo. And so I've been to Kitchener-Waterloo any number of times, and I've been to Toronto, and I've been to Niagara on the Lake, and I've been to, I went to a week management retreat. I think we were in Guelph or in a town near there. Anyway, where is Sarnia? You're muted, Ken.
Sarnia is right at the bottom of Lake Huron, and it's one of the border crossings. You would have either crossed at Detroit, Michigan, which is about 75 miles south, or you would have crossed in Port Huron to Sarnia, and it's one of the Blue Water Bridge, right? We're right on the border. We have a foot in both countries most of our life.
Yeah, I get it. I always crossed all those times around Buffalo.
Okay.
The Peace Bridge, but I do know the crossing you're talking about, and I know what you're saying about foot in both countries. Canadians understand that much more than Americans do.
Yeah.
Canadians always say they know a whole lot more about America than Americans know about Canada.
We do. It's interesting. We studied in high school. We studied a lot of American history, and then I went to university in Michigan. I did my master's and my doctorate in Florida. So I spent a lot of time in the U.S.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I because the publishing, I worked for the Mennonite Church Publishing, and we're dual national. I mean, we're binational, Mennonite Church Canada, Mennonite Church US, and so I went to Canada anywhere from 4 to 6 times a year at points. Besides coming to Kitchener-Waterloo and other places there, I've also been to Manitoba a number of times. And to Saskatchewan, and my favorite was to go to British Columbia.
Right.
I've been to the Vancouver area. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So but actually, I really liked Ontario. I thought I learned the Bruce Trail on the what's that escarpment called?
Niagara Escarpment.
Niagara Escarpment. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I have a good friend who's an author that lives up there. So, welcome everyone. The last 2 folks that have joined, you are very welcome, by the way, but I just have numbers on so if you know how to rename yourself, please do. I can also rename you if you'd like me to, so that way I don't have to refer to you by numbers. And one is an iPhone 130 number. So if I can rename you, or if you can rename yourself. The other one, the 169, I can also rename you if you want to unmute. So yes, the folks from everyone was joined earlier put where they're from in the chat. So if you all wouldn't mind putting in the chat where you're from, and that way you can see each other where they're from. Elizabeth is from St. Augustine, Florida, and I haven't been there, but let's see, we had some feedback there. I'd like to go to St. Augustine someday. I happen to know that's the oldest city in the continental United States. Patricia's from Gary, Indiana. I went to high school in Chicago area. Linda's from Michigan. Oh, Linda, great. We got your number in there. Fabulous. Glad to have you here, Linda. I much prefer calling you by your name than number. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and have a little, actually, I'm going to be sharing this screen the whole time, and you are welcome to ask questions. I've got a presentation about 6 questions. And this is 6 questions every author should ask before publishing a book. Hey, can you all see that screen? Okay, super. Yes. We're all on the same virtual page, which is good. I'm your guide, Russ Eanes. I live in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is in the Shenandoah Valley of Western Virginia, nestled between the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Allegheny Mountains. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist. Sort of post-career, I formerly was a book publisher, and my favorite thing as a publisher was to help an author put their ideas between the cover of books. So I've worked with people who just had an idea, and we worked with it until we had a book. And I've had authors that came to me with a complete manuscript and we published it. So I've worked with a wide range. In recent years, I've worked as a publishing consultant where I've helped people figure out how to publish their books, whether to self-publish it or work with a traditional publisher. And I'm actually now a full-time guide with Get Set Up. So I love teaching and working with older learners. I love the energy I get from you all, and love the wisdom that you have and hearing about your experiences. So that's why I'm doing this full-time now. I forgot to ask, was there anybody, this is your first Get Set Up class? Raise your hand if this is your first class with Get Set Up. Welcome, Gloria. Glad to have you join us. We've got one more person. Wonderful. If you're not on camera, you can raise a virtual hand, that little reaction button. You can raise a hand there. Looks like so far everybody, you've been in Get Set Up classes. Great. So you know what this is all about. We learn from each other. Ideally, we can see you with your cameras on. We have all sorts of things that you can learn to Get Set Up. I like to say you can learn about everything from how to operate your iPhone to how to choose the right red wine for supper, and everything in between. You can request a recording of this class later. I'll send you the link. It's email help@getsetup.io. That will come to you in your notes. If anyone's joining by live stream, the best way to participate is to join us and register for a class. We'd love to see your faces. And lastly, Get Set Up's not paid to promote any specific products. So let me start. Our agenda is basically today is to help a budding or would-be author with some basic concepts that they should consider if they want to publish a book, presented in the form of 6 questions. And I came up with this, by the way, because of all the authors I've worked with, and many of them came to me with their ideas quite advanced of what they wanted to do. And I said, well, we need to back up a little bit before we go any further and just ask and answer a few basic questions about what you're doing. So then so I eventually worked that into this thing called 6 questions. And we'll just go through them. The first question I ask an author is, what is it you're writing? Okay, what is the genre? Are you writing fiction, a novel? Are you writing a personal memoir, either about your life or about something that happened in your life? By the way, I also do a class on memoirs. Are you writing a self-help guide? You specialize in organic gardening, and you think you've got a great method that everyone should know. Maybe you're a poet. I had a woman last year came to me. She was locked in the lockdown like everybody else, starting in March. And she said, every day that I'm stuck home, I'm going to write a haiku. And so she got a hold of me in September. She had 100 haikus to publish. Maybe you're a photographer and you want to showcase your photography in a book. Maybe you're a cook and you have recipes, or you want to do a cookbook. Maybe children are wanting to know your life stories. Your life story, all these things are genre. And that's actually the first question, because the genre can determine a lot of things about the book you do. It helps you figure out what other books are similar in that genre, so you can compare yourself to them and get some ideas. It can also help you determine some things like format. For example, a cookbook has photos and it's printed on glossy paper. You can't do a cookbook on cheap, flat, sort of toothy paper. The colors don't jump out. I'm working with somebody that's doing a kayaking guide, and that kayaking guide is going to be all color, but we're going to print it on waterproof paper, because we know people are going to take it with them in the kayak and they're going to drop it into the water, and they don't want to have it ruined. So those are just some simple ideas, but there's a lot more behind it that the genre or type that you're intending to write or publish can determine what it's going to look like, which is the second question. What do I want that book to look like? Am I making a print book? Am I making an ebook, or both? How long is that book? What's the size it's going to be? Is it going to be in paperback? Is it going to be in hardcover? Is it going to have photos or illustrations in it? How long? The weight and the quality of the paper is a factor for not only cost. Better quality paper costs more, but also higher quality paper might be thicker, so the book's going to turn out thicker. So maybe in the idea of that, you've got an idea of what you want to write, but you also need to think, well, what do I want that thing to look like? So I'm going to stop here, and I'm just going to share with you some basic things because I think you know these, but just in case you haven't thought about it, this gives you some ideas that probably the most common thing we all know about is the traditional paperback book. Right here, I've got a copy of Short Walks from Bogota by Thomas Filing. He's actually an English author. This is published by Penguin Random House, one of the big five publishers. They publish hundreds and hundreds of books per year. They publish them in the UK. They publish them in the United States. It's printed on inexpensive paper. It's got a very nice cover, though. It's got a nice, well-designed color. It's got kind of a matte finish to it, so it's not slippery. But this is probably the most common size of paperback. So that's something that is you'll see everywhere. Then we've got hardcover books. Oh, and before I show you hardcover, let me show you a different kind of paperback. So this is a higher quality paperback that a guy just sent me a copy of. He's the author of this book called All Hat, and it has what's called French flaps. The front flaps of the book fold in kind of like the dust jacket on a hardcover book, and it's a little bit higher quality. He's got higher quality paper. He's got higher quality cover stock. So again, it's a little more expensive book, a little bit higher quality. Or maybe you've got a hardcover book. Here's a real tiny hardcover I picked up recently about bike riding, Words to Ride By. And this is an interesting little hardcover book because all the color and all the artwork is printed right onto the cover. So it's got kind of that cloth feel of the cover underneath it. And it is a cloth cover, but it's embossed. And then inside, we've got different colored pages, like some of the stuff's in green and some of the stuff, and it's got black type in it, a lot of artwork, a lot of reproduced advertisements from times gone by. So very nice little high quality book, but hardcover. We're all familiar with hardcovers. Usually we're more familiar with a larger hardcover book. Here's a book I've got in front of me. This is a guide to walking the Camino de Santiago. I'll be doing a presentation on that tomorrow. A friend of mine published this, Sandy Brown, and it's got lots of color photographs in it. So this is done on a very glossy paper, and that glossy paper is a bit heavier. That means that the book actually is pretty hefty, but you want color, high quality paper. That they call that coated paper, like COAT coated. That makes that kind of shiny feel, and that makes colors stand out. So he wanted the color photographs to stand out. Or here's a book that was done by a musician, Carrie Newcomer. She's a folk singer in Indiana, and she self-published this book. It's got song lyrics. It's got poems. It has essays and speeches she's given. And it was self-published, very nice, very, very well designed. The cover, the interior design, it's a 6 inches by 9 inches book. This is probably, I'm not sure which is the more common size. The one that I showed you that's like 5.5 by 8.5 or 6 by 9, but these are very common. This one happens to be done print on demand. And if you come to my How to Self-Publish a Book, I'll talk more about this. You can tell a book is print on demand because it has a little barcode inside the very last page. That barcode is the same barcode that's on the back cover of the book. And when they're printing these one at a time, they print the cover in one place in the plant and the text in another place, and they bring them together. And the person that glues the cover on, he just scans the cover and scans the text inside. And if the barcodes match, he says, well, that's the cover that goes in that book. And he glues it right on. So those are just very common types of books. Many are bigger, like a cookbook is usually bigger. So, but that's something to think about. So when you've kind of zeroed in on your genre, like if let's say you're writing a work of fiction, we'll go to the literature or fiction section of a bookstore, and you'll see what size those books are. In fact, you're going to find those books are almost always, size kind of like this. So that gives you an idea what you want to do. Any questions so far on book types?
Do
Okay.
textbooks fall into any of those categories, like the self-help or what?
Well, textbooks publishing is kind of its own animal. And actually, we've had somebody come into our classes that wants to do a textbook.
You got another
Textbooks are usually, okay, very good. That was, who was that said that? Oh, Elizabeth. textbooks are usually longer. Sometimes they're bigger. And they usually cost more. Textbooks are not cheap. And they're usually republished frequently. You don't usually do a textbook and then come out with a second version 10 years later. You come out maybe every other year with a version of the textbook, unless it's a standard thing that never changes. I suppose it could stay. Ken, did you have a question?
Yes. When I look at your list of the type of books and this sort of thing, and that's one of the areas, I don't want to spend too much of your time. I just think this book that I'm trying to put together is somewhere between a manual and a memoirs and life story. It's a book about a residential program that we ran for I was director for 32 years. It was very unique, very different. And we were very successful because it's interesting. The program has died off and gone. And it's interesting, all the success stories that we have. I have these mini stories from all these people. And I'm giving each of them, my plan is to give each of them, say 2 or 3 pages, their own chapter. But it's going to also include memories and things that we did. And I'm not sure how I'm going to do this yet. That's why I keep taking your classes. I keep thinking I'm going to pick up ideas. So,
well, if you have time to come to tomorrow nights, because that's a good time to you can bounce that off some other people.
I maybe do that.
Actually, I've read things that are kind of like what you're talking. They're a retrospective on something. It might be a retrospective on like you said, a history. Yeah, it's not strictly a personal memoir, but it's kind of writing out of experiences. Exactly. And those are done. I see those. They're not uncommon at all. And what we can do in the by the way, if you all can contact me directly, and I'll make sure I drop my Get Set Up email in the notes that you'll get at the end, russ@getsetup.io. So you are welcome to contact me directly through Get Set Up. I now have a Get Set Up email address with a question. Hi, Linda. Linda, you look familiar. You've been in classes before. I know Linda. But you can come to tomorrow night. Also reach out to me directly and see if I can maybe give you some suggestions. Because what I tell people, and we don't do it in this class, I wish we had time to do it, but it's what I call book modeling. And we talk about that a lot in the Publishing Mastermind. I always encourage authors, you don't have to invent anything. There's probably not a book out there. There's probably nothing you can do that somebody hasn't gotten an idea and done already. And you can learn from them and you can copy them. You can mimic them. That happens all the time. You can mimic them in the style. You can even mimic them in their writing style. I mean, when I'm working on a book right now, and I keep thinking of authors whose style I want to mimic. You don't want to mimic it too closely because you don't want people to think you're just simply imitating someone else, but you can learn from their style. So yeah, that's a very good point, Ken. Okay, let me just do another screen share with you. We'll go back and talk a little bit more about some of these questions. Okay, so we've talked about what things look like. The next question, I often say this is the most important question, is who is my audience? Okay, the audience are the people that are going to read your book. And until you know who that audience is, you really can't finish writing what you're doing, because your audience helps you decide how you're going to write and how you're going to market your book. I gave that example of a cookbook. Cookbooks are written in a very particular style. They're also written with a certain audience in mind. So for example, if you're writing a book, a vegetarian or vegan cookbook, you're going to have to use a lot of language and illustrations and examples for people who are vegetarian or vegan or want to be. And that's different than just a traditional meat and potatoes kind of cookbook, which frankly, hardly anybody does a traditional meat and potatoes kind of cookbook. Actually, the most common cookbook these days is what we call cuisine. So particular cultural style of cooking is probably the most common thing that's done, or if you're not a celebrity. But so you gotta know who your audience is. Who are you writing for? And you have to be specific. You can't say, oh, I'm writing for everybody. The whole world needs my book. Well, you might think so, but the whole world isn't going to buy anyone's book. I worked with an author last year. Actually, he's a very good writer, and he had written a book about addiction. He's been sober for 35 years. And so he knows a lot about addiction. And I asked him, who's the audience? He goes, well, everybody's my audience. I want everybody to read this book. And I said, you got to be more specific. And so he went back to the drawing board and he thought about it more. He said, okay, my audience are addicts or friends and family of addicts. And the reason I asked him that question is I was actually editing his book for him. And I said, well, that's good to know, because I'm going to make sure as I'm editing this book that families and friends of addicts see stories, illustrations, and language in here that they can relate to. When you're thinking of an audience, you need to think of demographics like gender, age, nationality, interests of your audience. And by the way, you can have more than one audience. So in by the way, your audience might just be your family. I really encourage people to write memoirs, even if it's just read by your children in a manuscript form. But some people, like my friend Cal Redicop, wrote a book about the first 12 years of his life. I've got a copy of it here. It's called Enchantment and Despair, Montana Childhood Stories, 1925 to 1937. Cal is now 95 years old. He just gives this book away to people, but he started by writing it for his grandchildren. He wanted his grandchildren to know what it was like to grow up as a kid on a farm in Montana during the Dust Bowl. And his family lost their farm because the land literally blew away. And that experience also isn't just a nice sentimental collection of children's stories, but got Cal thinking about why did that happen? Why were we farming somewhere where the soil blew away? And he realized, well, we shouldn't have been farming there in the first place. We shouldn't have been plowing the soil. And Cal went on to become a college professor, and he's an environmentalist, an early environmentalist. And that all grew out of his childhood. And he likes to give that book away because he just wants people to know this is where it all started for me. So I also wrote a book. I published for hundreds of authors, but I finally wrote my own story, The Walk of a Lifetime, 500 Miles on the Camino de Santiago. I wrote it and published it in 2019. And so anybody want to have, this is a famous pilgrimage route in Spain. It took me 5 weeks to walk it. Anybody want to venture a guess on who I decided my audience was?
Pilgrims.
Pilgrims. Excellent. Any more ideas? Well, pilgrims is right.
Catholics.
I decided there were three audiences for my book. First one was pilgrim who have already walked the Camino de Santiago. So they've done that 500-mile walk, and they want to read about the experience of somebody else. Then I said, well, I also am writing for people who want to walk it someday because I want them to know what the experience is like. So I had that audience in mind. I explained a lot of things that maybe a person who had walked it already knew, but I wanted to explain it for the person that hadn't walked it. And by the way, I knew that 30,000 English speakers walk it every year. So that I knew I had a pretty sizable audience year in, year out. But in my process of writing it, I also discovered that I had a third audience, and that third audience was I call these people North Americans. So that's US and Canadian, over 55 who want to accomplish an adventure in their life. So I walked the Camino de Santiago when I was 61. And I wanted people to know that, hey, just because you're older doesn't mean you can't do something great like walk 500 miles with a pack on your back. And I discovered a lot of people who read my manuscript in its early stage. I call them beta readers, early readers. They didn't know anything about the Camino de Santiago, but they said, I'm now in my 50s, my 60s, and I've raised my family. I've had my career. I want to have some adventures in life, and I'm inspired to read about what you did. So I got that third audience. And so a lot of the people that pick up my book these days haven't walked the Camino de Santiago and probably won't, but they want to read about what did it mean to be 61 and to do something like that you dreamt of doing for 20 years. Okay, the fourth question. Okay, so we've identified the genre, what it is. We know what it wants to, what we want it to look like. We have identified the audience. Now, how's that audience going to find out that you have this? This is what they call discoverability. You have to be discoverable. It's no use having the best book written in the world if nobody is aware of it. And just to give you a little sobering statistic, if you think of self-publishing as I did, nearly 1.7 new books were self-published in the US in 2018. Now, I don't have the numbers for 2019 or 2020. I have a suspicion the numbers are greater those 2 years. That's a lot of people out there publishing stuff that are competing for this big audience that reads English. So you've got to be able to have a way of specifically letting an audience know that you have this thing, because there's a lot of people out there that have published something. And the same guy that I mentioned who said the whole world was his audience, he'd written a book about addiction. He had struck it rich because he had published a book about being a survivalist. It was a work of fiction, and it came out right in 2008, just by chance, when the world economic system melted down, and all these survivalists loved reading his book. It was just a work of fiction. It went sold like crazy. So it was a self-published book, and it did really well. Well, he followed it up with 6 more books about all sorts of different things. And none of those books sold more than a few copies. Well, it's because there's a lot of people competing for that attention. Discoverability means promotion, engaging with readers, doing advertising, being in front of your audience, making presentations. And now we do presentations online. I was doing presentations in person a year ago as an author. It means doing publicity, marketing, so that your book stands out. Here's an example of discoverability we're probably all familiar with if we shop on Amazon. We know that when you shop on Amazon, it not only shows you a product that you might be looking for, but also suggests things to you. So this little screen you see in front of you, I typed into the search bar the title of my book, and it brought up another book, and I scrolled down the page, and it showed me books that it thought that I might like, and products related to this book up here that you can't see. This is discoverability. Amazon is giving readers a chance to discover all 10 of these books listed here. And the ones up here are being presented by Amazon because Amazon knows you as a reader. And so it's suggesting these ideas to you. But down below, these are all sponsored right here. See, it says sponsored. That means someone has actually made a paid advertising, has done paid advertising on Amazon for their book to show up when someone searches for that. Any questions up to this point about audience discoverability? Okay, let me go on a bit here. The 5th question is, what kind of platform do I have to showcase myself or my work? Okay, your platform is a position from which you speak, a combination of credibility, experience, and promotion. Traditionally, platform, for example, would be media interviews. You would get newspapers or radio interviews or newspaper reviews or articles about you in the local paper. Nowadays, it more likely means social media presence. I have a Facebook page. I also have a personal website. I have a blog. I offer free written samples of my work. So you can go to my website and you can find the first chapter of my book for free. You can read it. I figure that if somebody reads the first chapter and really likes it, they'll come back and buy the book. So these are all the kinds of things that you need to do if you want as part of a platform. And whether you are self-publishing or you work with a traditional publisher, it doesn't matter. A traditional publisher will say, well, what is your author platform? What's the position from which you are speaking? And an example of a blog I put here is Jane Friedman, by the way. She's somebody that's really good. If you ever want to find anything about publishing, she's kind of the know-it-all in the industry, and she does a great blog and weekly newsletter. Jane Friedman. I'll send you that link. 6th question, and this is one that a lot of authors don't think through very clearly, but I asked them, I said, well, what's your definition of a successful outcome with your book? Is the definition of success going to be how many books you sold? Or maybe you're someone who's just giving them away. Is it going to be defined by how many copies of your book you gave away? Maybe readers contact you. So I have a contact form on my website, and readers can visit my website and they can fill that out and they can send me an email. And so I often hear from readers of my book, they'll say, I really liked your book or whatever, or I have some more questions. And sometimes I've exchanged a week or two back and forth email with readers, and I love it. To me, that's a definition of success, that readers contact me. Do you want to earn a living? It's really hard to do as a book author. I won't kid anyone, but I've had people who that's their definition, is how much they earn. I earn a little bit of income as an author. I get royalties on my book. But I set the goal after I published my book in the 1st of September, 2019. I said, I want to sell 1,000 copies my first year. Okay, so I set that outcome. So the outcome you set determines a strategy, and those strategies that you create drives actions. So, example, I did lots of blogging about the topics in my book. I wrote guest articles. I did advertising. These are all things that were part of that strategy to get up to that 1,000 copies the first year. And I actually got to 1,000 copies 10 and a half months in, and I hit my second 1,000 copies 5 months later. You want to make outcomes realistic and achievable. So that guy before I said wrote the book on addictions, I asked him how many copies of his book he wanted to sell. He said, I want to sell 10,000 copies the first year. I said, well, that's a good goal. It's pretty hard to reach for a self-published author. To do it, you're going to have to invest a lot of time and money in promotion. And I knew he wasn't willing to do that. So I didn't want to throw cold water on him, on his idea, on his book, but I knew that if he wasn't going to put forth enough effort, he wasn't going to get 10,000 copies just by word of mouth or just by luck. One of my outcomes that I was looking for was that I wanted to appear in something called Books and Brews. So if you look at the left side of the screen, I've got WMRA Books and Brews. It is an event hosted monthly by our local national public radio station. They bring in local authors. I guess they don't have to be local, but they bring in authors, usually local, who share about their books. And afterwards, they do a book signing. And I had 250 people come over 2 evenings to hear me. And that was an outcome I wanted. I wanted to be in front of an audience telling them about walking the Camino de Santiago and about my book. So that was another outcome that I was looking for. Let me show you one last thing, then I'll bring everybody back together. I do some related classes. One is called How to Self-Publish a Book, and one called Everyone Has a Story to Tell, How to Write a Memoir. We'll show you about how to start a memoir, not how to write one. It's ideas to get you started about writing a memoir. And those classes are next week, and I hope to see you in some of those classes. Now I am going to stop my share and see everybody and ask what questions you all may have.
I do have a question. So with the memoirs that we've talked about me doing, with the number of pages that we were talking about doing, you know about how much time it might take? Because I am like, in this crazy real estate market, I am like so tight on time. But I really want to finish my first memoir, but do you have any type of professional advice on how much time I should time block to do it? Like, I don't know, a few times a week work on it, or I guess I just don't know how to block the time, or any thoughts on that though?
Yes, I can give you some thoughts, Linda, because I have the same problem. And what I've discovered is that it's better to take a little bit of time every day than a lot of time just one day.
Okay.
Though occasionally I would take a lot of time one day. The reason is this: I find that the longer I take off between writing, the longer I have to figure out where I was last time I stopped.
Okay.
And I have to start a new job here full time with this. So this is taking me a little bit of time to work into this. So my goal eventually, my best time for writing is either early in the morning or very late at night, believe it or not. I've gone back to my old college practice of writing late at night. I wrote all my term papers late in the evening. So I would say for me, my goal is to, in a couple of weeks, getting back to sitting down and writing 1 hour every morning, because that's my best time. My mind's clearest. And then if I feel like it, I have the time in the evening, sit down in the evening and follow it up. Now, part of my writing is I also do research, and I gather quotes and ideas and I put them down. Sometimes that comes to me later in the day. But my simple advice is do a little bit every day rather than a lot just one day, because you'll spend less time trying to figure out where you were.
Okay. Okay. About how many hours on a memoir? We talked about the number of pages, right? But or the number
Well,
of words.
Another
That's
thing you can do,
equivalent.
Lynn, is you can set yourself a goal. You can say, I'm going to sit down today for an hour and I'm going to write 500 words or 1,000 words, or you set yourself some realistic, achievable goal. Make sure it's achievable, because if you can't achieve it day in, day out, you'll get discouraged. So set one that you can achieve and then try to go past it if it's realistic to go past it. And also remember that your first draft will sound terrible. Sometimes I'll put it nicely, authors call that's the regurgitate draft. That's where you kind of get everything out onto paper and then you kind of put it all together. My first draft, it started with all these pieces of a puzzle that I kind of had to assemble. And so I went from having just gazillion pieces to maybe the pieces assembled into, like I got edges here and this color's over here and that color's over there. And then I took and put those pieces together into the final thing. I mean, my book had 3 or 4 drafts. At least some of it had 3 or 4 drafts, but get that first draft going.
Okay.
And one more bit of advice, get the first draft going. And when you think you've really got the first draft to where you want to be, set it aside for a month, work on something else. You'll come back to it and see it with a fresh eye. That's what my first book. The only regret was that I didn't have enough time between completing the first draft and when the editor got the second draft. I could have used a little more time because the editor spent longer with me than she needed to. Ken.
Can you still hear me? I lost the picture. I can get it back in a minute. But,
I gotcha.
Do you actually print the various chapters, or do you just keep them all in files in your computer?
You can do it either way. Definitely keep them on files in your computer. And by the way, Linda or Ken or anyone working, don't get rid of those first drafts. Just put them in an older folder marked first drafts or second draft or whatever. I also, when I cut big chunks out of a book because it didn't fit, but I thought it was actually some pretty good writing, I put those things in their own folder or their own file, because sometimes I write an article about the book or about the topic and I can come back and like, hey, you know what? I got 500 words written on it that's really good here, and I can work with that. Ken, I like to when I get it to a certain point, I like to print it, so it's saved as a file. I print it on paper for 2 reasons. Number one, I can read and edit and think through more carefully on paper than I can on the screen. And number 2, I actually try to limit the number of hours I spend per day looking at a screen. And I find that I can kind of engage with it better on a piece of paper. So that's what I'd say about printing it.
I guess what I'm trying to visualize here is if I have all these various chapters, and I guess the way you were describing it, that's the easiest way to sort out how you're going to put this thing together.
Yep. My memoir about walking 500 miles started with, probably 15 stories and anecdotes. And then I had about 15 lessons that I'd learned, kind of like
Right.
thing. And what I did then was I sorted and I put stories with lessons. So I eventually fit a story to a lesson. And I didn't put all the stories in. I mean, I should say 15 stories. I probably had 30 stories about things I'd experienced. I picked 15 that fit with lessons. And then I said, okay, I'm going to structure this by making it start the day I began, and it's going to end the day I ended. And so I'm going to walk 500 miles through this geographic, landscape, and I'm going to stick a story somewhere in the landscape that it fits. So, and the chronology, the only chronology that mattered was where I was on the journey. So I didn't back up, I didn't say lesson number 1 occurred on day 30. And then the second lesson, chapter 2, was day 1. I wanted people not to get confused. They just followed me all along, and I made sure the stories fit the chronology. So, I would make sure that the story referred to actions that had happened before.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a bit of a job. It all depends on what they call that structure that you want to have.
Yeah.
And
Most of the questions I have or the thoughts I have here that I think I'm going to steer toward your session tomorrow you're talking about, because I don't want to take these other folks' time. So I'll set back after that.
yeah, no, that's good. One thing I'll just leave you with, and you can maybe think about this before tomorrow night's session, is what's very important are themes and structures of anything that's written. And that's where I say to someone, look for other models. And I did that with my book, by the way. I looked at how other writers of similar memoirs about walking the Camino structured their books. And I said, I like that. I don't like that. Mine will look like that and not like that. And that was just a real important thing. I had to just actually pick up those books and look at them. More questions from Patricia or Joanne or Sylvia, Elizabeth, Linda, anyone. You can ask a second question even if you asked one before.
So
Would you say a little bit more about the platform?
Yes. That platform is very important. And in fact, I did not publish my book until I had an author platform. And I would say a bare minimum, an author platform requires some form of social media presence. It could be Twitter, it could be Instagram, it could be Facebook, it could be something, LinkedIn. There's all sorts of social media that you can use. The reason social media is an advantage is because it can be shared with a much wider audience than you might be anticipating. That's important. I believe you should certainly have a landing page about your book. So when I had my title of my book finalized, I went out and I purchased the URL for that. By URL, I mean the .com. I found that the walkofalifetime.com was not taken, and I went and bought it. I bought the walkofalifetime.org. I bought several that were similar. And I didn't have a website built, but I had that. And I said, the very least, there's going to be a page so people can go, because if you look on my book, and almost every book published nowadays has a reference to some forms of URLs on there, either the author site or the book site. And that's also a handy thing when you're doing publicity. Imagine in the past, you might be talking to an audience and you might pass out a brochure, read this, Well, I think of URLs or web pages as like virtual brochures, virtual flyers. And you just tell people, go to thewalkofalifetime.com. And then I also went out and I purchased advertising on Google. And I said, if they look for this, or this, bring them to these pages. That's search engine. And then you can also do what's called search engine optimization. I won't explain that, but it's a way to make sure that when someone searches for a certain term, they find what you want them to find. You do all that before you publish, so that when it goes live the first day, you have a platform there for people to find you. So people who do it the other way around are often discouraged, and they find they're missing. I think the biggest thing is they're missing opportunities. We'll see you, Ken, if you have to go. Joanne asked, is it costly to publish a basic paperback 6x9 book? If you do a print on demand, the cost might be about $3 or $4 a copy, and you can only get 1 or 2 copies. If you want, you can get 100 copies. So it doesn't matter. You can get what they call offset printing, which they print in big sheets, but they do those in the thousands. The unit cost is less, but now you have to pay several $1,000s and have several thousand copies that you got to figure out what to do with. So I never have more than about 50 copies of my book around. Any more questions?
Let me look and see here. Well, you know what?
Hi, this is Pat.
This is
I'm
a-
actually working on, I'm not doing a book right now, but I'm actually working on a chapter out of a book that's going to be published with my family. When I say with my family, we are going to do a book on, it's going to be biblical. So he's been given a biblical verse, and we will each get a chapter in it. So I was trying to get some information here, and this did help. You know, I know who my audience is, but now I can home in on what I want them to get out of it. So this has been helpful for me. I'm also going to interview people and not use exactly what they say about how they feel about that particular verse. When I put it in a book, do I have to put their name in there, or do I have to footnote it? Or when I say I'm going to put what they say, I'm going to kind of like summarize, or I would actually like to ask certain number of people and tally what that means to them, because when you talk about the Bible and verses in the Bible, it does mean different things to different people. But when I get the information from the individuals that's giving it to me, will I have to footnote, or
I think it's
Okay.
good if you just quote them. But say this is, from whoever said it. You don't have to
Okay.
footnote it probably.
oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, you've been a great group. I've really enjoyed being with you all. I had these other two classes, how to self-publish a book, and I think it's called Everyone Has a Story to Tell, how to start a memoir, and the publishing mastermind tomorrow evening at 7. And I hope I can see any or all of you there. I know some of you have been to those classes already, and you are
I
also
think
welcome
quite
to
a
come
few.
back to those classes. If you look at my guide page at Get Set Up, you can see when those other classes are, and you can register for them. Thanks so much for coming this evening, everyone. Yes, Patricia, you have one more question.
Yeah, one more question. Now, I worked in a prison, and while I was there, I worked with juveniles, and the juveniles and myself, we composed a book. Each one of them did like a page, 2 pages, and we put it together. I don't know what most of them are, but I couldn't, if I use anything out of there in a book, when I start talking about teaching and how it went and different, I have to, how could I put that in my book about maybe not naming the individuals, but
You can sometimes change someone's name, or just
okay,
say someone who wasn't named. You can do
no
that too.
problem. Thank
You can
you.
do that. Sure.
Thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
they did a very good job on it, and they all left and took one copy with them. Okay,
Fabulous.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I enjoyed seeing you all. You'll get a follow-up email about the class. It's a chance for you to offer feedback to me. Any way I can make the class better, please let me know. If you have suggestions for other classes that Get Set Up should have, you can send in your suggestions. Also, if any of you are interested in, we do have opportunities for members of the Get Set Up community to host social hours and other things. So there's that chance for people. I'm really glad to have had you all tonight, and all of you have a good evening.
You also, and everybody here also. Yes. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.